Picture this. A young lion opens his mouth and lifts an entire mountain. With a single vocalization, he redirects thunderstorms, creates bridges across raging rivers, and sends armies flying through the air like leaves in a hurricane. On the surface, Kion's Roar of the Elders appears to be Disney's most straightforward magical power. Point, roar, problem solved. But that surface interpretation misses something extraordinary hiding in plain sight. The Roar of the Elders isn't what we think it is. Watch carefully during any major roar scene, and you'll notice something the characters themselves rarely acknowledge. Those aren't just sound waves rippling through the air. Look at the clouds. Every time Kion unleashes the full power, ghostly lion figures materialize in the sky above him. Translucent, majestic, and roaring in perfect harmony with his voice. These aren't metaphorical representations of ancestral support. They're literal spiritual entities channeling their power through a living conduit. The great kings of the past aren't cheering from the sidelines, they're actively participating. This revelation transforms everything we understand about the power's mechanics. Kion doesn't generate supernatural sonic waves through enhanced vocal cords or magical amplification. He serves as a spiritual medium, allowing deceased lions to roar alongside him from beyond the veil of existence. The devastating force comes not from his lungs, but from the combined voices of generations of royal spirits adding their strength to his call. Consider the implications. When Kion struggles to control the roar, he's not fighting against raw magical energy. He's wrestling with the collective will of ancient spirits. When the power fails him, it's because the ancestral lions choose not to answer his call. And when evil lions appear in fire instead of clouds, we're witnessing a spiritual hierarchy actively choosing sides in cosmic conflicts between good and evil. But here's where the mystery deepens. The power's most spectacular uses might actually be its least important applications. Yes, the roar can flatten armies and move mountains, but examine its subtler applications and a different picture emerges. The power creates precise rain showers during droughts without disrupting weather patterns elsewhere. It generates focused lightning strikes that can illuminate caves without causing fires. It enables long-distance communication across vast territories, allowing coordinated rescue efforts when animals are separated by disasters. These aren't side effects of a destructive weapon. They're primary functions of an environmental management system. The Tree of Life holds the key to understanding this distinction. Every use of the roar creates an invisible connection, stretching across continents to that mystical location, where healing springs, eternal and diverse species coexist in impossible harmony. The tree doesn't just serve as the power's source, it's its ultimate destination. Every application of the roar either draws energy from the Tree of Life or sends energy back to it, creating a closed loop that maintains cosmic balance. This explains why the roar's environmental applications feel so natural, while its combat uses often backfire or create unintended consequences. The power flows most freely when serving its original purpose, maintaining the delicate equilibrium that allows all life to flourish within the circle of life's embrace. Watch Kion's journey through this lens, and his character development takes on new significance. He doesn't gradually become more powerful. He gradually understands what the power actually is and what it's meant to accomplish. The young lion who initially used the roar to blast hyenas away from watering holes eventually learns to call down gentle rains that solve water shortages without displacing anyone. The evolution from weapon to tool of balance isn't character growth. It's spiritual awakening. But this raises the most intriguing question of all. If the roar represents such sophisticated cosmic responsibility, why does it consistently choose second sons over heirs to the throne? What psychological or spiritual qualities make younger siblings better suited to channel the voices of the ancestors? The answer reveals something profound about power, responsibility, and the ancient wisdom embedded in traditions that predate written history. Something that challenges everything we think we know about leadership, inheritance, and who truly deserves to wield ultimate authority. The choice of second sons isn't arbitrary tradition, it's psychological necessity. But before we explore that psychology, we need to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the cobra in the volcano. The most telling evidence of the roar's true nature comes from its interaction with corruption. When Scar used this same power during his time as Lion Guard leader, he didn't gradually lose strength or accuracy. Instead, the spiritual lions themselves abandoned him. The moment he chose personal ambition over service to the circle of life, the ancestral voices fell silent, leaving him with nothing but his own mortal roar. This isn't punishment in the traditional sense. It's the natural consequence of breaking a spiritual contract that transcends individual desire. The great kings of the past don't withdraw their support to teach lessons or enforce rules. They withdraw because corruption creates spiritual dissonance that makes the connection impossible to maintain. Think of it as a cosmic frequency mismatch. The ancestral spirits resonate at a frequency of service, protection, and balance. When a user's intentions shift towards selfishness, anger, or dominance, they begin vibrating at a completely different spiritual frequency. The connection doesn't break. It becomes physically impossible to establish, like trying to tune a radio to a station that doesn't exist on your receiver. This explains why evil lions appear in fire when the roar is used with corrupt intentions. They're not the same spiritual entities choosing to manifest differently. They're entirely separate beings. Lions whose spirits became trapped in lower spiritual planes through their own corrupted choices. When users resonate at frequencies of anger and hatred, they attract these malevolent spirits instead of their noble ancestors. The visual metaphor is perfectly chosen. Good spirits appear in clouds because they've ascended to higher planes of existence, while evil spirits appear in fire because they remain trapped in realms of suffering and fury. This spiritual mechanism creates a fail-safe that prevents the roar from becoming a tool of oppression. No matter how strong or clever a user might be, they cannot force the power to serve selfish ends. The magic itself ensures that it can only be used by those whose hearts align with its fundamental purpose, protecting all life within the circle of life's delicate balance. But this brings us back to our central mystery. If spiritual purity is the primary requirement, why do second sons consistently prove more capable of maintaining that purity than their older siblings? What psychological factors make younger siblings more resistant to the corrupting effects of ultimate power? The answer lies not in magic, but in the fundamental psychology of royal families and the hidden burdens that shape the minds of future kings. Every royal family harbors a secret that Disney accidentally stumbled upon. The heir to the throne is often the worst choice to protect it. This isn't a critique of individual character. It's a recognition of psychological reality. From the moment they draw their first breath, future kings live under crushing expectations that fundamentally alter their relationship with power, responsibility, and moral decision-making. They must think like rulers before they can think like individuals, which creates blind spots that prove catastrophic when spiritual authority is involved. Second sons, by contrast, grow up free. Watch young Kion in early episodes, and you'll see something remarkable. Genuine surprise when others defer to his authority. He doesn't expect obedience. He earns it. He doesn't assume his ideas are correct. He tests them against reality. Most importantly, he doesn't view the Lion Guard as his rightful inheritance. He treats it as a responsibility he must prove worthy of every single day. Compare this to Simba's early behavior in the original film. Even as a cub, he confidently declares, "I just can't wait to be king," expecting the world to bend to his will simply because of his bloodline. His song lyrics reveal everything. No one saying do this, no one saying be there, no one saying stop that, no one saying see here. Future rulers fantasize about freedom from constraint, while second sons learn to create value through constraint. This fundamental difference in psychological development creates opposite relationships with power. Heirs learn that power is something they possess by right. Second sons learn that power is something they must earn through service. Heirs develop confidence in their own judgment because everyone constantly reinforces their importance. Second sons develop humility because they must constantly prove their worth to skeptical audiences. The psychological research is overwhelming. People who expect authority from birth make systematically different decisions than those who must earn it. They're more likely to prioritize short-term gains over long-term stability, more prone to ignore advice that challenges their preconceptions, and more vulnerable to surrounding themselves with supporters rather than truth-tellers. But the most crucial difference lies in their relationship with failure. When heirs make mistakes, the system protects them. When Simba runs away after his father's death, he gets to spend years learning life lessons in a consequence-free environment before returning to claim his birthright. When second sons make mistakes, they face immediate repercussions. When Kion accidentally sends Bunga flying with an uncontrolled roar, He loses the power entirely until he demonstrates improved judgment. This creates what psychologists call error-corrected learning versus error-protected learning. Second sons develop more accurate self-assessment because their mistakes have real costs. Heirs often develop inflated self-confidence because their errors get cushioned by institutional support. The pattern repeats across generations with eerie consistency. Scar, the second son of his generation, showed early promise as Lion Guard leader. Brave enough to stand up to evil lions, powerful enough to master the roar, idealistic enough to protect the circle of life. But his corruption came precisely from trying to claim what belonged to his older brother. The moment he started thinking like an heir instead of a protector, his spiritual connection to the ancestral lions shattered. Mufasa, despite being a wise and noble king, never received the roar. Not because he lacked moral character, but because his psychology was fundamentally shaped by heir thinking. He made excellent decisions for the kingdom's long-term welfare, but he made them from a position of assumed authority rather than earned trust. The roar doesn't just require good intentions. It requires specific psychological conditions that heirs rarely develop. Consider Kion's most controversial decision: choosing a honey badger, hippo, cheetah, and egret for his lion guard instead of following tradition with 4 other lions. An heir would never make this choice. Heirs think in terms of preserving institutional legitimacy and maintaining established power structures. They understand intuitively that radical changes threaten their own authority. But Kion, thinking like a second son, approached the problem differently. He wasn't worried about legitimacy, he was worried about effectiveness. He wasn't concerned with maintaining lion supremacy, he was focused on protecting all animals equally. His outsider perspective allowed him to see past species prejudice to identify the actual strongest, fastest, bravest, and keenest-sighted animals available. This decision reveals the deeper psychological advantage second sons possess: emotional distance from existing power structures. Heirs are born into systems they will eventually control, which creates unconscious bias toward preserving those systems, even when they're inefficient or unjust. Second sons observe these same systems from the outside, which allows them to identify flaws and inequities that insiders miss completely. When Vitani later forms her own lion guard using traditional all-lion membership, the contrast becomes stark. Her team is competent and well-intentioned, but they think like enforcers rather than protectors. They focus on maintaining order rather than questioning whether that order serves justice. It's not coincidence that Kion ultimately passes the roar to Vitani only after she demonstrates willingness to challenge him directly, proving she's developed outsider psychology despite being positioned as an heir. But perhaps the most revealing psychological difference lies in how heirs and second sons relate to legacy. Heirs inherit their ancestors' achievements along with their responsibilities. They carry the weight of living up to previous generations' accomplishments, which creates pressure to match or exceed past glory. This legacy pressure makes them more likely to pursue dramatic, memorable actions that will secure their place in history. Second sons, by contrast, must create their own legacy from scratch. They're not measured against royal predecessors because they're not expected to follow the same path. This freedom allows them to focus on actual problems rather than perception management, to prioritize long-term solutions over short-term victories, and to make decisions based on merit rather than historical precedent. The psychological profile that emerges explains why the ancient magic system consistently chooses second sons. They're more likely to maintain the spiritual purity required for ancestral connection. But this raises an even deeper question about the magic itself. If the system is sophisticated enough to select for specific psychological traits, and powerful enough to maintain cosmic balance across vast territories, what kind of ancient wisdom traditions inspired its creation? The answer takes us far beyond Disney's animated universe into authentic African spiritual systems that have guided communities for thousands of years. Disney didn't invent the spiritual framework underlying the Lion Guard, they discovered it. Dig into authentic African cultural traditions, and the magical system stops looking like fantasy entertainment and starts resembling respectful adaptation of genuine spiritual wisdom that has guided communities for millennia. The reverence for ancestral spirits, the concept of collective responsibility for environmental balance, even the specific role of lions as spiritual guardians, all of these elements exist in traditional African belief systems with remarkable, consistency across vast geographical and cultural distances. The Ubuntu philosophy provides the foundational framework. I am because we are. This isn't just feel-good collectivism. Ubuntu represents a sophisticated understanding of interdependence that extends beyond human relationships to encompass all living beings within shared ecosystems. When Rafiki speaks of the circle of life, he's articulating Ubuntu principles through accessible metaphor. The recognition that individual well-being is fundamentally inseparable from community health and environmental balance. The magical implications become clear when you realize that Ubuntu-based societies traditionally view spiritual power as collective property rather than individual possession. Shamans, healers, and spiritual leaders don't own their abilities. They serve as conduits for community wisdom channeled through ancestral guidance. The most powerful magic comes not from personal strength, but from alignment with collective needs and natural harmony. This explains why the roar requires spiritual consensus from the great kings of the past. Traditional African cultures consistently portray ancestors as active participants in living communities rather than distant historical figures. They provide guidance through dreams and visions, influence daily events through spiritual intervention, and maintain direct interest in their descendants' moral development. Ancestors aren't worshipped. They're consulted as elder advisors whose wisdom transcends individual lifespans. The great kings function exactly like traditional African ancestral councils. They don't automatically support living rulers simply because of bloodline relationships. Instead, they evaluate each decision based on its impact on collective welfare and long-term community survival. When they withdraw support from corrupt users, they're following ancient protocols for spiritual accountability that prioritize community well-being over individual authority. But the system includes sophisticated safeguards against spiritual corruption that reveal deep understanding of power's psychological effects. The appearance of evil lions in fire rather than clouds isn't arbitrary visual metaphor. It reflects authentic African spiritual concepts about the afterlife and moral consequences. Traditional beliefs describe multiple spiritual planes where souls reside based on their earthly behavior and moral development. Noble ancestors ascend to higher planes symbolized by sky and clouds, while corrupted spirits become trapped in lower realms associated with fire and suffering. When users access the roar through anger or hatred, they're literally tuning into different spiritual frequencies occupied by lions whose own corruption trapped them in these lower planes. The evil spirits don't provide genuine power. They offer addictive spiritual connections that gradually corrupt users while appearing to enhance their abilities. This creates a perfect fail-safe mechanism. The more someone tries to use the roar for selfish purposes, the more they become dependent on corrupted spiritual connections that ultimately weaken their abilities while destroying their moral judgment. It's impossible to maintain long-term power through evil means because the spiritual system is designed to prevent exactly that outcome. The environmental applications reveal even deeper cultural connections to traditional African ecological wisdom. African cultures have always understood that human communities exist within rather than above natural ecosystems. Traditional leadership structures include specific roles for individuals responsible for maintaining environmental balance, monitoring animal migrations, predicting weather patterns, managing water resources, and ensuring sustainable hunting practices. The roar's environmental functions mirror these traditional ecological responsibilities with supernatural enhancement. When Kion calls down rain during droughts, he's performing digitally amplified versions of traditional rain-calling ceremonies. When he uses the power to redirect dangerous weather patterns, he's engaging in the same type of environmental stewardship that traditional African communities have practiced for generations. The Tree of Life itself draws direct inspiration from baobab tree traditions that span the entire continent. Baobabs are known across Africa as trees of life that can live over 1,000 years and serve as community gathering places for storytelling, ceremonies, and dispute resolution. Traditional beliefs describe them as places where ancestral spirits reside and as bridges between earthly and spiritual realms. Communities build their most important social institutions around these trees because they represent stability, wisdom, and connection to deeper sources of spiritual authority. Disney's Tree of Life functions identically, a mystical location where healing flows from ancient wisdom, diverse communities gather for mutual support, and spiritual connections between physical and metaphysical realms remain strongest. The healing properties don't come from magical medicine, but from spiritual alignment with natural harmony and ancestral guidance. This reveals the broader magical ecosystem as a sophisticated spiritual technology for maintaining cosmic balance. The network connecting Tree of Life, Pride Lands, and Spiritual Realm operates like traditional African governance systems where local leaders maintain autonomy while drawing authority from higher spiritual sources. The Great Kings provide overall guidance and power. Regional leaders like Simba manage day-to-day decisions within established parameters, and specialized protectors like the Lion Guard handle threats that require spiritual intervention. Power flows in cycles rather than hierarchies. The Tree of Life provides energy that enables the Roar protects communities that support the Tree of Life, and the Great Kings ensure that all applications serve the Circle of Life's fundamental principle of balanced interdependence. No single individual or institution controls the entire system, because traditional African wisdom recognizes that concentrated power inevitably leads to corruption and imbalance. Even the specific choice of lions as magical guardians reflects authentic African cultural symbolism. Across African cultures, lions represent spiritual authority, protective courage, and connection to ancestral wisdom. The Maasai earn the title lion through acts of bravery that serve community welfare. Zulu traditions describe lions as embodiments of ancestral spirits returning to guide and protect their descendants. West African folklore portrays lion spirits as guardians of cosmic balance who intervene when natural order faces serious threats. Disney didn't arbitrarily choose lions as magical creatures. They drew from cultural traditions where lions already held these exact spiritual roles. The Roar of the Elders represents respectful adaptation of authentic African concepts about vocal spiritual power, with traditional beliefs holding that people with strong singing abilities possess special spiritual connections and that powerful voices can literally call upon supernatural forces for community protection. This cultural foundation explains why the magical system feels simultaneously fantastical and spiritually grounded. The creators weren't inventing magical rules from scratch. They were translating traditional African spiritual wisdom into accessible family entertainment. The result is a magical universe that resonates with authentic spiritual truth, while remaining engaging for modern audiences who may never have encountered these cultural traditions directly. But understanding the cultural foundations raises profound questions about individual character development within this traditional framework. How does an ancient spiritual system designed to maintain collective balance interact with modern psychological concepts about personal growth, individual responsibility, and moral choice? The answer lies in examining one specific character's journey through the lens of both traditional wisdom and contemporary understanding of trauma, power, and redemption. Most protagonists embrace their destiny. Kion spent 3 seasons running from his. This fundamental character trait, the reluctance to accept ultimate power, reveals sophisticated psychological understanding that most children's entertainment completely misses. While typical heroes discover their abilities and immediately begin training to maximize them, Kion's first instinct when receiving the roar is fear. Not excitement, not pride, not even curiosity about its potential applications. Pure instinctive fear of what this power might do to him as a person. That fear proves to be the most psychologically healthy response possible. Research consistently shows that individuals who seek power are the least suitable to wield it responsibly, while those who fear power's corrupting effects are more likely to maintain moral integrity under pressure. Kion's initial reluctance indicates psychological self-awareness that many adult leaders never develop. The recognition that extraordinary power poses extraordinary dangers to personal character and moral judgment. Watch his early episodes with this perspective, and every major decision takes on new significance. When he chooses non-Lion Guard members, he's not just being innovative, he's actively resisting the ego boost that comes from commanding his own species. When he consistently seeks advice from Rafiki, his parents, and even his guard members before making important decisions, he's building psychological safeguards against the isolation that typically accompanies ultimate authority. The pattern reveals deliberate character architecture designed to resist corruption before it begins. But the series' most sophisticated psychological exploration comes through the Cobra Venom arc, which functions as an extended metaphor for trauma and its effects on leadership capacity. When Ushari's bite begins altering Kion's personality, the symptoms mirror real-world PTSD with startling accuracy. Increased aggression, violent mood swings, loss of confidence in decision-making abilities, and tendency to lash out at allies who are trying to help. This isn't just magical corruption. It's a clinically accurate portrayal of how external trauma can activate dormant psychological vulnerabilities. The venom doesn't create new character flaws. It amplifies existing tendencies that Kion had been successfully managing through conscious effort and spiritual practice. His fear of becoming like Scar, always present but controlled, becomes overwhelming anxiety that paralyzes effective leadership. His natural protective instincts, previously channeled through careful restraint, become hair-trigger responses that threaten everyone around him. Most importantly, the corruption progresses gradually enough that Kion retains awareness of his deteriorating condition while feeling powerless to stop it. This captures the psychological reality of trauma responses, where individuals often recognize their behavior patterns changing, but struggle to regain conscious control over emotional reactions and decision-making processes. The healing journey proves equally sophisticated in its psychological realism. Kion's recovery doesn't come through magical cure or simple willpower. Instead, it requires community support, professional guidance, spiritual practice, and ultimately the courage to forgive those who caused his trauma. The Tree of Life provides the setting and resources for healing, but the actual work must be done by Kion himself through conscious choice and sustained effort. The forgiveness of Scar represents the culmination of this psychological development, demonstrating mastery that transcends magical power to embrace spiritual wisdom. When Kion chooses to forgive rather than destroy his uncle's spirit, he's not just being merciful, he's breaking the cycle of trauma that has haunted his family for generations. This moment reveals the deepest psychological truth embedded in the entire series. The ultimate test of power is the wisdom to choose healing over vengeance. Scar spent his entire existence trapped in cycles of resentment, jealousy, and revenge that ultimately consumed everything he claimed to value. His corruption began with legitimate grievances about unfair treatment, but his inability to process those traumas constructively led to increasingly destructive choices that harmed everyone around him, while never actually addressing his underlying pain. Kion faces the exact same choice point when confronting Scar's spirit. He has legitimate reasons for anger. Scar manipulated him, poisoned him, and tried to destroy everything he protected. The traditional heroic response would be righteous fury leading to spectacular magical destruction of the villain, but Kion chooses a different path entirely. He recognizes that Scar's corruption stems from unhealed trauma and chooses compassion over condemnation. This decision requires extraordinary psychological maturity. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior or pretending that serious damage wasn't done. Instead, it represents the recognition that holding on to anger hurts the forgiver more than the forgiven, and that healing requires breaking cycles of retaliation that perpetuate suffering across generations. The psychological research supports this narrative choice completely. Individuals who develop the capacity for genuine forgiveness show improved mental health, stronger relationships, and more effective leadership capabilities compared to those who remain trapped in resentment. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the ultimate expression of personal power and emotional intelligence. But the series saves its most profound psychological insight for Kion's final major decision, choosing to remain at the Tree of Life rather than returning to claim his place in the Pride Lands. This choice represents the complete inversion of traditional heroic narratives, where protagonists typically return home to claim rewards and recognition for their achievements. Kion instead recognizes that his greatest service lies in embracing a different role entirely, becoming a healer and protector for the broader magical ecosystem, rather than a regional leader within familiar territory. The psychological wisdom embedded in this decision reflects advanced understanding of leadership development and personal fulfillment. Many individuals spend their entire careers climbing hierarchies toward positions that ultimately don't match their actual talents or interests, driven by external expectations rather than authentic self-knowledge. Kion's choice represents the psychological maturity to prioritize purpose over prestige. He recognizes that his unique combination of magical abilities, trauma recovery experience, and spiritual development makes him uniquely qualified to serve as King of the Tree of Life, a role that requires healing wisdom rather than political authority, spiritual insight rather than tactical command, and the ability to facilitate growth in others rather than direct control over outcomes. This decision also demonstrates the ultimate mastery of power that the first Lion Guard leader taught. Only one who is willing to let go of the roar can truly master it. Kion doesn't lose his abilities by choosing the Tree of Life. He gains the mage's ear, wisdom to use them for their highest possible purpose. The parallel with traditional African leadership transitions is striking. Many African cultures include traditions where young leaders temporarily leave their communities to gain wisdom and experience before returning to serve. But some individuals discover during their journey that their greatest contribution lies elsewhere entirely. These transitions are celebrated rather than mourned, because the community recognizes that authentic leadership requires following one's true calling, rather than fulfilling predetermined roles. Kion's journey from reluctant cub to wise king represents this same progression from external expectations to authentic purpose. His character development doesn't follow the typical arc of gaining power and learning to use it responsibly. Instead, he learns to recognize what power is actually for and how to align his abilities with their deepest purpose. This psychological sophistication raises the final question about Disney's true achievement with this series. How did family entertainment intended for young audiences end up containing graduate-level insights about power, trauma, healing, and spiritual development? What messages were the creators actually trying to convey through this elaborate magical framework? The answer reveals Disney's most ambitious educational project, disguised as simple adventure stories. The Lion Guard isn't children's entertainment that accidentally contains profound wisdom. It's a sophisticated educational framework deliberately disguised as adventure stories. When Disney's creative team began developing this series, they faced a challenge that reveals their ultimate ambition. How do you teach complex lessons about leadership, environmental responsibility, social justice, and spiritual development to audiences who think they're just watching cartoon animals fight bad guys? The answer they developed represents one of the most successful educational Trojan's horses in modern media. Consider what actually happens when young viewers follow Kion's journey. They watch a character consistently choose collaboration over dominance, see diverse teams outperform homogeneous ones, observe environmental problems solved through understanding rather than force, and witness the gradual development of emotional intelligence and spiritual wisdom. None of this feels like educational content because it's embedded within genuinely exciting adventure narratives, but the cumulative psychological impact shapes viewers' fundamental assumptions about leadership and responsibility. The Lion Guard institution itself functions as a masterclass in organizational psychology. Traditional children's shows feature clear hierarchies where the main character gives orders and supporting characters follow them. The Lion Guard operates as a collaborative network where each member contributes unique expertise and leadership rotates based on situational demands. Kion leads during crisis situations, but Beshti takes charge for water-related challenges. Fuli manages high-speed rescues, and Ono coordinates aerial reconnaissance missions. This structure teaches viewers that effective leadership isn't about commanding others. It's about recognizing when to step forward and when to step back, how to leverage different perspectives and abilities, and why diverse teams consistently outperform uniform ones. These lessons appear naturally within action sequences, but they're actually sophisticated training in collaborative leadership that many business schools struggle to teach effectively. The environmental messaging operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Surface level, the Lion Guard protects animals and habitats from immediate threats. Intermediate level, they solve ecological problems by understanding natural systems rather than overpowering them. Advanced level, they demonstrate that environmental stewardship requires spiritual connection to the land and recognition that human well-being depends entirely on ecological health. Watch how environmental challenges get resolved throughout the series. Water shortages are solved by understanding watershed patterns and animal migration needs, not by forcing rivers to change course. Invasive species problems are addressed by identifying why natural balance was disrupted and restoring ecological relationships, not by simply removing unwanted animals. Natural disasters are managed by working with geological and meteorological systems rather than fighting against them. These solutions reflect cutting-edge environmental science, translated into accessible storytelling. But the series saves its most radical messaging for social justice themes that challenge fundamental assumptions about hierarchy, privilege, and systemic inequality. When Kion chooses non-Lion Guard members, he's not just being inclusive. He's directly confronting species supremacy that mirrors real-world racism and classism. The reaction from other characters reveals how privilege operates in practice. Simba's initial objection, "The Lion Guard has always been made of lions," perfectly captures how privileged groups defend discriminatory traditions by appealing to historical precedent rather than current effectiveness. His assumption that lion leadership is naturally superior reflects unconscious bias that many viewers will recognize from their own experiences with racial, gender, or economic discrimination. Kion's response demonstrates how to challenge systemic inequality constructively. He doesn't attack his father's character or deny lion capabilities. He simply proves that diverse teams achieve better results. This approach teaches young viewers how to advocate for inclusion without triggering defensive reactions that typically shut down productive conversations about privilege and justice. The series consistently demonstrates that diversity isn't charity, it's strategic advantage. Throughout 3 seasons, Kion's diverse guard outperforms traditional all-lion teams, not because they're trying harder, but because they bring different perspectives, abilities, and problem-solving approaches to complex challenges. This messaging directly contradicts the merit-based arguments often used to defend discriminatory practices by showing that merit itself depends on having the right combination of different talents, rather than the highest concentration of any single talent. But perhaps the most sophisticated educational element involves spiritual development and the nature of authentic power. Traditional children's entertainment teaches that heroes gain power, learn to use it responsibly, and then use that power to defeat villains and protect innocent people. The Lion Guard teaches something far more complex: that true power comes from service rather than dominance, that the greatest strength lies in restraint rather than force, and that authentic leadership requires the wisdom to know when not to use available power. This spiritual framework draws from authentic wisdom traditions while remaining accessible to secular audiences. The series never promotes specific religious beliefs, but it consistently demonstrates principles found across spiritual traditions: the interconnectedness of all life, the importance of ancestral wisdom, the corrupting nature of selfishness, and the transformative power of forgiveness. These teachings appear through magical metaphors that work whether viewers interpret them literally or symbolically. When Kion learns that only one who is willing to let go of the roar can truly master it, he's receiving instruction in spiritual detachment that appears in Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, Islam, and traditional African spirituality. The magical framework makes these concepts accessible to children who might otherwise find philosophical instruction boring or incomprehensible. The psychological sophistication embedded throughout the series rivals graduate-level coursework in leadership development. Consider the trauma and recovery arc, which provides clinically accurate portrayal of PTSD symptoms, realistic healing processes, and healthy coping strategies. Young viewers watching Kion's journey learn to recognize emotional regulation challenges, understand that trauma responses are normal rather than shameful, and see that recovery requires community support rather than individual willpower alone. The forgiveness themes teach even more advanced concepts about breaking cycles of retaliation, distinguishing between forgiveness and enabling harmful behavior, and recognizing that holding on to anger hurts the forgiver more than the forgiven. These are therapeutic insights that many adults never develop, presented through exciting adventure stories that hold children's attention while shaping their emotional intelligence. The cumulative educational impact represents Disney's most ambitious attempt to influence positive social development. Children who absorb these messages grow up with fundamentally different assumptions about leadership, environmental responsibility, social justice, and spiritual development compared to previous generations, raised on more traditional entertainment. They expect leaders to collaborate rather than dominate, assume that diversity strengthens rather than weakens organizations, understand that environmental protection serves human interests rather than opposing them, and believe that authentic power serves others rather than the self. This isn't accidental influence. It's deliberate social education designed to create more conscious leaders for future challenges. The creators understood that entertainment shapes cultural values more powerfully than formal education, and they chose to use that influence responsibly. By embedding sophisticated wisdom within engaging narratives, they created content that educates without preaching, inspires without lecturing, and influences without manipulating. The result is family entertainment that works on multiple levels simultaneously. Young children enjoy exciting adventure stories with colorful characters and spectacular action sequences. Older children absorb lessons about teamwork, responsibility, and moral decision-making. Teenagers recognize psychological insights about identity development and social relationships. Adults appreciate cultural authenticity, spiritual wisdom, and sophisticated messaging about contemporary challenges. This multi-layered approach represents evolution in children's media from simple entertainment toward genuine educational impact that respects audience intelligence while delivering meaningful content. The Lion Guard succeeds because it trusts viewers to grow into the wisdom it presents. Rather than dumbing down complex concepts, the series provides age-appropriate entry points into profound ideas and trusts that understanding will deepen over time. Children initially attracted by magical roars and talking animals gradually absorb lessons about authentic leadership, environmental stewardship, social justice, and spiritual development that will serve them throughout their lives. This is Disney's true achievement, creating entertainment that makes audiences better people simply by engaging with it. The ancient magic system, the psychology of second sons, the cultural authenticity, and the character development all serve this ultimate purpose. Disney built an educational framework so sophisticated and effective that it influences positive development while audiences think they're just having fun. And that might be the most magical element of all. The Lion Guard proves that family entertainment can be simultaneously engaging and enlightening, profitable and purposeful, accessible and profound. It stands as evidence that audiences hunger for meaningful content and that creators have the opportunity, perhaps the responsibility, to use their influence in service of human flourishing and positive social change. The roar that echoes loudest isn't the magical one that moves mountains. It's the quiet voice of wisdom that shapes minds, opens hearts, and builds the character of future leaders who will face challenges we can barely imagine. That's the true power Disney unleashed, and its effects are only beginning to be felt.